Hello Internet and welcome to this day in history for the 4th of October. Today we are in 1795. We are in France. We are more specifically in Paris. Now, the Terror had run its course a few years earlier, but the National Assembly of the French Revolution was still threatened by popular uprisings, as has been the course throughout much of, in fact, the revolutionary period. But however, on this particular day in 1795, a rather spectacular riot rebellion took place in which even the army was heavily outnumbered by the armed rioters as well as by certain rebelling and deserting army units. What had happened was that the National Convention have just voted on a new constitution and had declared itself a permanent basis, but having done this with a lot less popular support than they had in the past, they failed to realize that several sections of Paris who did not support them, but who knew the concept of rioting rebellion to its absolute perfection after the last 6 years, would rise against them, and they did. However, on this particular day in 1795, the General Menou, I'm butchering that because I cannot with French names, but he had been tasked by the convention to put down the rioting. He did this by hiring or recruiting, if you will, other military officers, particularly other military generals. In particularly, he hired a young and somewhat unknown artillery officer by the name of Napoleon Bonaparte. And this Bonaparte had a friend by the name of Murat, Joachim Murat. And this Joachim Murat, by force of arms, managed to lay his hands on a bunch of cannons. The rioters attempted to control the streets of Paris, but Napoleon and Murat was in position with their troops, and while the rioters did of course have some small arms, they did not in any way have any artillery, and Napoleon was a very good artillery officer. He quickly cleared the streets with his famous whiff of grape, as it is called, which is basically he used grape shot to clear the rioters from the street. If you don't know what grape shot is, that is basically when you take small bags filled with metal bearings and stuff them into the cannons instead of cannonballs, basically turning smoothbore cannons into giant shotguns. As you can imagine, in tight streets of Paris, those things can be fairly lethal against larger crowds. The crowds eventually had to get out of Paris itself, and without a way in, the rioting died down. This itself was not a completely uncommon occurrence during the French Revolution. As I said, rioting and forcing the government to do various things by rioting was not exactly a new thing. There had been basically that reason for the rise of the terror in some ways. However, in this particular case, it meant that the National Assembly had to do something to give thanks to the generals, which has saved both their position and mostly their lives. And they did this, of course, by transferring Napoleon with officers of his choice to the not supremely successful army of Italy. This was the moment where Napoleon's rise to fame began. He had already showed some promise during the siege of Toulon a few years earlier, but after his whip of grape, he, at the age of 26, took over the command of the army of Italy and led it to some spectacular victories against the Austrians in 1796 and 1797, before then being given command of the Egyptian expedition. I don't need to go in further of Napoleon's long and illustrious career. Everyone knows this, or at least everyone should know it, but 1795 on the 4th of October was the day he began his prominent rise to power by his whiff of grape in defense of the National Assembly on the streets of Paris. So yeah, 4th of October, this day in history. Until next time, I have been the Sage, and I wish you all a very happy day.